Okay, yeah, I'm going to turn it down a little bit. There we go. Okay, that sound how we look? Sound good? Okay. All right. So, and we do have Explora. Do they want to? You guys want to say anything like directly or no? You're good. Like Explora, and the short story is basically more or less everything is reopening at full capacity. So there are some nuances, and some of our team members are going to talk about that. And I really just want to begin, I think, by saying that, you know, throughout the pandemic, we have tried to, number one, make sure everyone was informed. Number two, to make sure our city carves its own path. And we made a lot of decisions early on to actually stay open. So I want to really thank about 3/4 of our workforce, our city workforce, that came to work basically every single day during the pandemic. And a lot of them were repurposed. You know, they were used to work in the chemo, and then they were packaging PPE and so forth. And we are, in a big way, unwinding all of that, and everyone is returning to work at City Hall and all the different city facilities into the job that they actually signed up for, instead of an emergency-related job that we asked them to do. So that's a very good thing for our workforce and, of course, for our community. I think a lot of us expect public servants to be at their job, and so they are going to be in July going forward. Now, we are phasing in certain small areas that may still be by appointment and things of this nature, but in general, more or less, everything is going to be back open and in person. Now, I also want to mention that, you know, through each phase, whether it was the color-coded system or when we were on lockdown, you know, we tried to do things that I think that were very distinct from other cities, and some of that was about keeping the safety net strong and secure. And you saw that by us keeping our emergency health centers open the entire pandemic. There are 4 of them around the city. The rental assistance work that we provided, the over $10 million in economic development assistance that we provided for small businesses to get them through. There's been a lot that we were able to do, and hopefully it is really showing now that we are poised to build on a strong recovery. That's what we're seeing this summer. By the way, our GRT numbers and budget numbers are all up even from 2019 as of April. So we think our city economically is actually in a very good position when it comes to recovery. Now, in the past month, we announced in June that we were starting to reopen some major things like Isotopes Park, Biopark, Balloon Fiesta, Civic Plaza, Convention Center. Now, wonderfully, we are able to fully reopen those facilities. I do want to mention, especially for the Convention Center, the events there usually have a long lead time. So you're not going to see a ton of activity at the Convention Center because those bookings are often several months out. But the good news is they've started those bookings, and we had Comic-Con there this weekend, which was great to see. That was really the first large public event in the Convention Center. That's also why you saw a bunch of people in costume all over Civic Plaza on the weekend, too. We got a few calls about why that was happening. And so as these restrictions lift, this is good news for whether it's downtown or businesses or otherwise. I do want to acknowledge also that the city, like almost everyone, is also dealing with a labor shortage. So we want to encourage everyone, whether it's for bus drivers, solid waste drivers, lifeguards, even just receptionists and attendants throughout City Hall, and I know throughout the city. We are hiring. All these jobs are on our website. And we would ask people that if you are on unemployment, you know, that is the way things are working now, and we understand that, and it makes sense economically. If you can make more money, we understand that. But remember, it's going to run out. So go ahead and apply, get in the queue, and line up a job for the day that the unemployment runs out. That's what we really want, and so hopefully you can walk into the city of Albuquerque and start a wonderful new job and not skip a beat when it comes to August and some of those deadlines for unemployment. So with details on this, let's hear from our COO, who's going to run through the numerous reopenings, Lawrence Royale.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. And boy, it sure is nice to be at a press conference where we're talking about opening things as opposed to closing things like we were some months ago. But we made a conscious decision early on at the beginning of this pandemic that we were going to maintain services and programs for a lot of our families in our community that needed those services, including given them access to our green spaces, our open space programs, our if you will, our parks, etc. And also that we would provide meals for seniors where we could. We improvised and created a whole different system for delivering meals to seniors. On the whole, just realizing that these folks in our community really needed our help, and the mayor made a conscious decision, let's just get creative about how we do that. So that creativity, I think, helped us tremendously through the course of the pandemic, and quite frankly, gave us a good opportunity to assess how we actually provide some of these services. And I think going forward, as you'll see in some of my comments, we've made some tweaks here and there in our services that actually I think will provide a better service for the community in the long term. So there was a bit of a silver lining to this, but let me begin by saying that beginning here at the end of this week and early next week, all of our staffing levels in our city facilities will be up, as the mayor said, up to, if not 100%, at least to 95% in many of our facilities. Our biopark will be opening up, convention center, our libraries, museums, and community centers. Isotopes Park will be at 100%. Civic Plaza will be back available for use, etc. So all of these will be back at pre-pandemic levels and operations so that now the community can begin to get back to what we know and what we've always appreciated about Albuquerque. Beyond adding capacity to these updates, let me talk about our community centers, our Martha Gen centers, our opening with all of our fitness programs, etc. They're all going to be back at pre-pandemic levels, so don't hesitate to go to your local community center and talk to the folks there and begin your hopefully getting back to your routines of before the pandemic. City pools, you no longer need reservations. Children can come to, adults can come and use our pools going forward. We did learn something about what we are now calling time ticketing, which was if you will, an opportunity for us to manage the number of folks that were going into our facilities. And actually, through the course of the pandemic, we used those when we were in complete lockdown to try and manage just the number of folks in city facilities like the zoo or the museums, et cetera. And it actually created an opportunity to realize that it actually gave folks a better experience, because now you can do time ticketing and come into a facility, have a little more space, if you will, between, if you will, for example, at the museum, if you're looking at art, and not have so many people at one time. So we're going to keep the time ticketing program at the museums, the Albuquerque Museum, the Balloon Museum, the Biopark, but without the restrictions of capacity. So if you will, just to give people an opportunity to schedule a time. However, if you still want to go to those facilities, you can walk up and get and go into the facility as well. However, it gives us a little bit of way to plan, and also gives families a way to plan, if you will, on when they're going to be there, et cetera. So it was something that we learned through the pandemic that actually made sense, and we're going to continue to move with that concept going forward. Parks and rec events like summer concerts, hiking, educational programs, the Youth Corps, and all the other cleanup events that we do during the course of the year, again, pre-pandemic, are all now going to be open. And so folks will now be able to enjoy all of our programs that our Parks and Rec Department has to offer. We're also doing a week-long summer adventure camp at the Balloon Fiesta Park, a little bit of a new program. And for folks that want to register for that, they can go to play.cabq.gov. It's a great little new program, and it'll be at the Balloon Fiesta Park. And it's a week-long summer adventure camp. Special event permits now are going to begin to be issued again in earnest, so that if neighborhoods want to do special events in the neighborhoods, block parties, etc., or if we're organizing any kind of a special fundraising event, et cetera, now all our permitting programs will be opened up again so that folks can begin to enjoy those as we get into the middle of the summer months. City special events. At the rail yards, for example, will now be open. The biopark, Old Town, the museum that has salsa under the stars are now going to be beginning to get activated, et cetera, so you'll be able to enjoy those. Plus, a special opportunity for us, also Summerfest will start. And we have 3 Summerfests planned. The first one is at the end of July, and stay tuned as we start rolling out the Summerfest program, but we really want to make sure that we can continue to give our city residents the opportunities to feel like things are really beginning to get back to what we used to know as our normal. Balloon Fiesta Park, Albuquerque Museum, Biopark, and other facilities will open up for events and reservations. So if you're planning a wedding, or planning a reunion, or any of those kinds of activities, you can go to all our facilities and start beginning to plan those, et cetera, and we'll have staff there to make sure that those reservations take place. Elena Gallegos, our open space, our major open space, and the Carolino Canyon spaces will now start accepting reservations for picnics and outings on the weekends, et cetera, in the evenings, et cetera. So again, using our open space program. The city's BMX track returns to full operations for those BMX enthusiasts in our community. You'll be able to go out to the BMX track and enjoy the track itself. Libraries opening to full capacity. Virtual summer reading programs will also be offered, and we'll be continuing to expand those programs in all the libraries. So again, an opportunity to use those facilities. Our animal shelter, will stop having adoptions by appointment only. Now they'll open full time so folks can come in, et cetera, and adopt a pet. We are waiving the fees through August 3rd for adoptions, simply because what we have seen is that we did a great job during the pandemic in getting animals out to foster folks that took care of the animals during the pandemic, et cetera, and offered some companionship, especially as we all know, many of our and particularly our elderly folks in our community, our seniors, really love the idea of having a pet. But now as the pandemic is waning and folks are want to get a little more freedom, some of those animals are coming back to the shelter. So we are doing a very concerted effort to continue to have free adoption services, et cetera, at the Animal Welfare Department, but it will be also fully operational. A place where we actually also learned a little bit about the capability of our amazing staff is in our Senior Affairs Department. During the pandemic, we did meals where folks came in, or we dropped off meals at people's homes all over the city, et cetera. So we're now obviously opening up our seniors for meals and fitness programs, and having folks come back into the senior centers to enjoy what they have always known about our seniors programs. But we're going to continue to provide takeout lunch, if you will, meal services for seniors, so that if seniors want to come in or their families want to come in and get a lunch for them, like they were doing the pandemic, we'll have some of that. But we'll also obviously open up our seniors programs. On July 6th, services for transition for folks to come into the senior centers will begin. So that's a little bit different than the July 1, but nonetheless, next week, seniors can start coming into our senior facilities. And then we will also be adding breakfast to that offering as well. So we're hopefully getting it back into the full swing in our senior program. Some recreational and fitness programs will resume on July the 6th as well in our senior facilities. Things like high-step fitness classes, et cetera, Zumba, and some of the other activities that they enjoy will begin on July the 6th. To keep everyone safe in senior facilities, however, just because that is a vulnerable population and because we're still at the waning ends of this, hopefully, of this pandemic, we will be closing the senior facilities throughout the day just to sterilize and clean the facilities so that we can make sure that seniors feel comfortable being there. And so that'll be part of our ongoing, if you will, operations for the rest of the summer months as we move closer and closer to hopefully getting over this pandemic. Great virtual programming that was part of the senior services, where we were able to do videos, if you will, for folks to work out at home. We're going to continue to do some of that with our senior programs as well. And the last but not least, in our senior programs, we are going to be waiving the yearly fee for our seniors for this year, simply because they obviously didn't get a full year of services. So for the remainder of this year, all of the fees that we would normally assess for the services our senior facilities will be waived. And so all the seniors who really want to get back to our senior programs will be obviously able to do so. Last but not least, I think the mayor made a comment that really is worth repeating, and that is that, look, we made a really concerted effort to try and do the best we could through the pandemic. And I think that a lot of our vulnerable populations, a lot of our families that needed the services, we really worked hard. And it is a tremendous credit to the department heads of the city, to the individual employees that work in those departments that really, in many cases, were putting themselves at risk, a lot like our fire and police and our first responders, to provide services. The unsung heroes of those services really are folks that drove our vans to deliver home meals to seniors, are folks that kept the senior community centers open for young children, especially when their parents were needed either at City Hall or some other facility or some other place in the city because they were critical employees. All of those folks really deserve a big thank you, and certainly from an operations standpoint, I thank them for their service to their community. And then also, just as the mayor is always pointing out, the one Albuquerque spirit of our fellow citizens in Albuquerque that really work together to help make life better for a lot of folks, including our folks that were most in need, like our homeless folks, and the work that our Family and Community Services did for helping maintain services at our West Side facility and other facilities dealing with during this pandemic. And last but not least, as the mayor indicated, look, the city of Albuquerque is an amazing place to work. And I want to just encourage those of you who are looking for work. We are actively looking for bus drivers, for solid waste drivers, for folks to work in many of our departments across the city. So if you can go to our city website and get information about our jobs and job openings at cabq.gov, I would tell you all that really is a great opportunity for you all to really find a new career, and quite frankly, a very satisfying one that helps our community get better and make it a better place for us all to live and enjoy. So with that, Mayor, thanks for the opportunity to just give everyone a little bit of an update on where we are with our facilities and operations.
And as you can see, some of us use the pandemic to dye our hair purple.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. And we have a couple of other speakers that we do want to get to. I do want to mention, though, that, as I look around the country and around the state, a lot of governments are still closed. I mean, they're still working remotely, et cetera, or closed in one form or another. And that is seemingly, going to be the case for a lot of folks in the summer going forward all around the country, but also even during the pandemic. A lot of governments just essentially sort of just shut down. We've tried to do the opposite during the pandemic. Our mantra was stay open and stay safe. And you're seeing that has enabled us to open up much, much faster. I mean, we are now, and we have been through the color coding system, basically a week behind whatever announcement where we can adjust all city facilities and operations accordingly. So credit to all the department heads and our COO and our leadership team. Now, part of that, too, is because we have a wonderful crew at our Emergency Operations Center who is organizing and coordinating all of these efforts. And I want to introduce Dr. Mark Demena, the city's version of Dr. Fauci, to share a few words about where we're at with respect to the public health update.
Thanks, Mayor. We've been doing briefings like this for 15 months, and I'd just like to echo how great it is to be here talking about something that's a little more encouraging and not just what the latest negative development has been. Throughout that time, every time I've come to these briefings, I've come loaded with data and trends and statistics about where we're at and about what that means for us. And it feels like a lot of the time it's just like we don't know what's coming next. We don't know what's around the corner for us. We don't know what the latest trend is going to show, but we at least knew throughout this what we needed to do to get there in order to get past all of those things. So even at some pretty dark, pretty unpleasant times, we've had a very clear idea of what needed to happen next. And I think at a moment like this, it's really important to recognize all of the sacrifice and the commitment in the community, because people were willing to make sacrifices, willing to make changes, and be cautious when we asked for that. Just like Mayor said, we're at a point now where we're looking at reopening and going back to some semblance of normalcy, which is one of those catchphrases over the last 15 months that we've all talked about, but we're at that moment. And it's because everybody's worked so hard together. It is a time for some optimism. The pandemic does continue on in other parts of the world, but here in New Mexico and here in Albuquerque, we're doing well enough that we can look at turning a corner now. So again, thank you everyone for that. As we emerge from the state's framework and the restrictions and some of the other conditions that we've all had to follow in order to keep people safe in the meantime, the city is going to continue to follow state and federal guidelines in terms of masks. So just to be very clear on that, especially when you're talking about city facilities, but this applies anywhere you go, fully vaccinated people no longer need to wear masks indoors or out. Unvaccinated people need to continue to wear a mask indoors or out. That is the same philosophy, the same guideline that we're going to follow until such time as that changes. There will be some places where there will be exceptions to that people will note because the transportation industry has some different regulations. Our transit department is regulated under FTA and our aviation department is regulated under FAA. There are some additional requirements that they have to follow. So on city transit, at the bus stations, the bus facilities, on the buses, people will continue to need to wear masks regardless. The same is also true in airports. So as you return to travel, you'll notice going into airports, masks are expected and going to be required both in the airport and on flights. And we urge cooperation and just ongoing, understanding that that's for everybody's protection and it's a requirement, not optional. The same thing will apply in youth programs. So as youth programs start up for the summer, you'll find participants and staff, and all of the youth programs will also expect to continue to wear masks for the foreseeable future. And again, just urging people to cooperate with that and understand that it's the highest level of protection for some of the most vulnerable areas that still exist. We do have a lot of people unvaccinated still out there, so we want to make sure that they're protected as they continue to return to some of those situations. On the subject of masks, we know that there are going to be a lot of people that want to continue to wear a mask, and I'm sure everyone has had some degree of experience. And I feel like I don't have my mask, I shouldn't be going anywhere. That's to be expected after all the emphasis that we've had on it. Some people are going to have a slower time returning to being comfortable with not wearing a mask than others, whether it's fear, anxiety, or any of a number of health conditions that they or a loved one may be experiencing. So, from us to all of you, we really encourage just be patient, be cooperative, be kind to those people. There's probably a very good reason why they want to wear a mask even if they don't need to, and they're not going to want to have it as an attack or a politicization in some way criticizing them for it. Just let it be what it is. It's a personal choice, and it's very much for people's safety and health considerations that they have. We are looking at, for Bernalillo County, about a 63.9% full vaccination rate from the last report that we got from the state. And our trends in terms of COVID positivity, test positivity, and cases have been low enough now that the trends aren't even that meaningful. It's just a sustained low level of transmission. So we're where we expect to be as we look to reopening and where we know that we'll be for a while. The pandemic, as I said, goes on. There continues to be some low level of transmission. A day where there's just not COVID anymore isn't coming, at least not in the foreseeable future. So we expect those low levels of transmission. We urge everyone to continue to be cautious. If you haven't decided to be vaccinated yet, again, we would urge people to research, to look into it. It's very much a personal choice, but I can tell you the vaccines that are available are safe. They're very effective. If you look at the trends from the times the vaccines became available, this is the path out that was promised to us. More people getting vaccinated means suppression of transmission. Where we should be seeing a surge in new cases, we're not because of the suppressive effect of vaccinations. So again, we just really urge people to look at that. That is a way that we can prevent ourselves from going into a backslide. Without getting too much into the science of it, I would just urge people not to get too hung up on what you're hearing in the media about variants of concern or breakthrough cases. Those things are to be expected even with a 95% effective vaccine. That means 5% of people may still be fully vaccinated and may still come down with COVID. Look to the more important trends beyond that, the hospitalization and the death rates. People who are fully vaccinated may get COVID, but they probably won't be in the hospital and they're far less likely to die. As we get into much more aggressive, much more dangerous strains, if you haven't heard about Delta, then congratulations for not paying attention to the worst of the news. But there's a very aggressive strain of COVID that's out there circulating now. The vaccines that are out there that have already been approved that we're using in this country continue to be protective even against Delta. Though it is more aggressive and there have been some breakthrough cases that are concerning, it's still the best path forward to be vaccinated, to be protected against those. And again, without getting into a lecture on it, suppressing transmission day to day by people being vaccinated reduces the opportunities for new strains to emerge. That's really where we're at now. We have things under control, especially in this country. If we continue to keep things at a very low level, we have far less opportunities for new strains to emerge. Worldwide, that's where we want to end up, where we're seeing less new strains emerging, threatening the protection that we all have for vaccination. And that really requires the global community to get together, do their part, help with the countries that have trouble getting vaccination, help encourage people that maybe just can't get to a vaccine to get there, and make that choice to try to round the corner worldwide. Lastly, on the subject of making vaccines available, now as we get past the point where the demand is far exceeding supply, there's plenty of supply out there. There's no reason not to be able to get a vaccine if you want to, and now you can walk into a pharmacy and just ask for it. You can schedule with a regular care provider to just get it. Vaccine is widely available. But as we kind of wind down the last of our period of restriction and closures, and we really want to encourage any last-ditch efforts towards vaccination before we do that, the city will continue to be supporting the mobile vaccination unit that's been talked about over the last several months. That will be until July 3rd available at the West Mesa Community Center. And that's open for walk-ups. You just show up and walk in and say, I decided I want my vaccine and I'm here for it. Monday to Friday, that's noon to 6, and on Saturdays, it's 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And then that trailer will move on July 4th and will be set up at Balloon Fiesta Park from 6 to 8 p.m. So if you're going out first for that event, there's an opportunity to get a vaccine there as well. And I think probably as time evolves, there'll be, continuing to be little pop-up areas where you can get a vaccine if you want to, but just giving everybody the possible chance to do that. Again, it's a very positive moment for us. We think that the risk is very low, and we look forward to being able to reopen and have some sort of return to normalcy. And again, thank you to everybody that's helped to make that possible so far, both within the city as an organization and within the city as a community.
Okay, now we want to wrap things up with a little bit about the perspective we've taken in the pandemic with respect to equity in public health. But I do just want to summarize. So in areas where there's kids, you might have to wear a mask. Example is Explora, other kids programs. Buses, mask, because it's a federal regulation. Airport, mask, because it's a federal regulation. Other than that, there shouldn't be places that are mandatory unless a private entity or business requires a mask, which they certainly can do. Now, the only other thing I would mention on this is that wonderfully there are no more social distance regulations. So I do get a lot of questions about, well, I feel like we're too close together, et cetera. And it goes to the point about just respecting people's comfort level, but also understanding that there aren't those regulations anymore. And also that capacity point goes hand in hand with that. So yes, you can sit next to someone at a movie theater or sit next to someone at the Isotopes game and that kind of thing, as long as, again, the proprietor allows it. It's no longer a requirement to have those distances. Okay. So with that, one of the other aspects of our city's strategy during the pandemic was to weave equity into everything that we did. And we're very fortunate because our Director of Equity Inclusion also ran our Emergency Operations Center in part in the beginning of the pandemic because of her public health background. So we had the perfect leader at the time of most need, both in terms of the fight for racial justice, but also for public health and safety. And so with her perspective, Michelle Melendez.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, when the pandemic started, our administration made applying an equity lens very much paramount, thanks to the mayor's leadership and his understanding about the pre-existing inequities in our city and our country. And so as a city during the pandemic, we looked very closely at where the highest needs would be, and we directed our resources there with very targeted outreach efforts. And this was to make sure that families who were at the most vulnerable, who would need food or who were housing insecure or unhoused population, including local businesses that would not be able to weather this pandemic without severe or very serious interventions. And when we were at that make or break moment, we really applied an equity lens. The pandemic across the country really exposed the cracks in the safety net, and here in Albuquerque as well, and greatly exacerbated the inequities that pre-existed. And so we're taking away from that the lesson that we can apply equity in everything that we do, like we did during the pandemic, going forward. So our Office of Equity and Inclusion has rolled out a new set of racial equity tools for all departments to use to really guide city leaders as they're thinking about programming and policies, how to continue to apply that racial equity lens, and how to engage communities that we needed to really learn to engage when the stakes were very, very high during the pandemic. Those that don't speak English or read English very well, those that are homebound, those that don't have homes, those that couldn't stay home when we asked people to stay home if they could. And so this set of tools really helps directors and their staffs continue to think about those intentional ways of engaging our communities and identifying and addressing those needs that continue to be with us after the pandemic, including for all parts of the recovery. So rental assistance, other kinds of monies that are being made available, how to make those as equitable as possible. And so this reopening time has been a time to reflect and to learn what we've learned over the past 18 months and to continue to improve our city's commitment and our ability to implement racial and social justice. So thank you, Mayor, for your leadership.
Okay, and I think with that, we'll certainly take some questions. I do want to mention, part of my job is to also think a little bit further down the road. And so I do want to let folks know that we're obviously keeping an eye on the different variants and what effects they're having. Fortunately, as Dr. DeMena mentioned, at least in the Albuquerque metro, our vaccination rate is so high that we're not too concerned about it right here, but I know in other parts of the state it certainly could be a concern. What we're really thinking through is schools reopening. That's obviously, or not reopening, but the school year starting. And believe it or not, that's only about 6 weeks away, which as a dad of 2 APS kids, I'm well aware of that timeline. And, we will see again what APS and the state decide, but right now it looks like, masks are certainly part of the equation, but kids will be coming back. That's certainly the current plan. And we'll have to see in September and so forth with respect to vaccine availability and also effectiveness and appropriateness for children. So that's going to be a big question for us in September. That our city, we do a lot of the vaccination clinics with APS, so we're sort of the operations behind it. And so that's something we're going to work with APS and the state on, depending on the sort of public health decisions that they make. And then going into the fall, we're acutely aware of the usual flu season and of the concept that there may or may not be boosters and things like that required. There may or may not be a combo shot that'll do flu and COVID. These are the kinds of things that we'll be working on for the fall. So I expect it to be a delicate fall, if you will, and we're also going to have in place the same flexibility and adaptability from the city perspective that we showed during the pandemic. So if we do need to take some quick measures here or there or for a couple of days or weekend, that type of thing, we absolutely will. We're going to be ready to do that, and we need to be. Like I said, I think it's going to be sort of a delicate situation this fall, and so we will be ready. All right, with that, questions from folks?
Just a clarifying question. I know you said masks still, around kids at facilities like this one, but just to be clear, at senior facilities, no masks?
I'm just going to check. I think that's true. Yeah, so again, if you're unvaxxed, you're supposed to wear one, but otherwise not required. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. In terms of COVID inspections, I know the city was doing those at restaurants. If there was complaints, when can you expect those, or will those completely go away as well?
I think the short answer is yes, and we have dialed them back drastically. So you haven't seen us talk about, enforcement and this kind of stuff for quite some time, as has been appropriate with the health order that's changed. And I mentioned this kind of repurposing. We had city security, we had our food inspectors, we had our code inspectors, and we had our firefighters all doing public health order enforcement. In June, so a month ago, we switched them all back to their day job. So we do have some inspectors who do regular inspections, and they'll certainly look for violations as they normally would. But we're no longer doing that kind of, wholehearted effort that we were. We stopped that about a month ago.
Okay. So buses, are we going back to the level of service before the pandemic?
So I'll bring up Lawrence to answer that, but want to remind folks it's a federal regulation about masks on buses. And in terms of service levels, we are still impacted by the shortage of drivers.
So we're moving into obviously implementing all the routes that were there before the pandemic. There are certain areas where you will see sun vans operating in certain corridors simply because the ridership levels are still fairly low in those areas. And as we start hiring drivers going into the bigger and full bus, if you will, where they require a CDL. But the short answer to your question is yes, we'll be phasing in the service in here in the next week, and you'll see more and more buses out on the corridor and restoring back to the level of service pre-pandemic.
Okay, so are you saying that some vans are covering bus routes?
Yes.
Because the licensure is different?
Right. For example.
Short of motor coach drivers?
Right. We're short motor coach drivers, so in the particular case, one good example is we would normally have a 40-foot bus going to the rail runner station at El Pueblo, right? So we're using a sun van that has the capacity to carry whatever passengers need of the service because they don't need a CDL. And as we get more and more folks, if you will, hired and trained with CDLs, we'll move back to the full bus operations in some of those areas.
Yes, so for those restaurants or businesses who are allowed to expand their spaces, will that continue?
That's a great question. First, let me just mention one other thing on transit. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we're excited. Our transit department went through the ART project, then they went through the pandemic, and now just this summer we're going to start evaluating all of the routes and how we do public transit in Albuquerque. That's a long-term, multi-year project, but the RFP for that consulting effort just started, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So we're excited to sort of reevaluate and think about transit in the city of Albuquerque post-pandemic and post-fixing whatever was left of the ART project. So to your question, we want to continue to encourage outdoor dining. There's no changes. They're going to take place this month. I will say that as we get back into a standard sort of operating procedure, we are going to go back to a permitting process and so forth as you normally would have in the planning department. But we're excited to continue to encourage outdoor dining. So we're going to probably modify that as we go to make sure that folks can keep doing it. But you are going to have to do it in a more traditional way where someone from the planning department comes out and makes sure everything's okay. We're obviously not going to continue to pay for your tent. Things like that are going to wind down. But we want to continue to strongly encourage outdoor dining, and we hope basically that it all stays. Lawrence, anything else you want to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
You said all city workers should be back to their regular jobs. Is there a percent that you're going to allow to stay working from home if they want? How are you guys handling that sort of teleworking situation?
Yeah, and an important caveat that we mentioned that in general, that is our approach. There are, several hundred folks who were dealing with different special situations. Could be personal health situations, that's the biggest one. And also, we're considering a phased-in approach because of the uncertainty with respect to families and kids and, just how no one knew what was going to be open this summer or when we're opening. So we are phasing in that return to work throughout the summer. But basically, we're changing the default. So if you have a reason or a concern, you can work through HR to talk about your particular situation and what might be appropriate. And we're very open and flexible with that. But if you don't work with HR on that, the expectation is that you will be at work at your desk as before. Okay, just checking with the boss back there.
You both mentioned you're hiring, the city's hiring. Can you just paint a little picture of, I guess, how many jobs you have to fill and what does that compare, I guess, to normal?
Yeah, I will say we had a challenge with transit drivers, motor coach drivers before the pandemic, but that makes it post-pandemic even worse. So that's sort of one aspect. And look, we also know we're seeing a high level of retirements even at APD, so we want more people in the academy classes and then our C&M academy class. But the systematic shortage is occurring in almost every department. And so, Lawrence, do you want to add a little on that?
Sure. So, as the mayor indicated, obviously, in some of our departments, the challenge was hiring before the pandemic, and now with the pandemic over, trying to get, obviously, some of those services up to speed. So I'll give you for example, our transit department, we have well over 330 or so drivers, motor coach operators. We're down about 50 to 60 operators actively recruiting, and actually just met with the transit director before this meeting, and we actually have several job fairs that are going on today, even one today, and we're starting to see that folks are beginning to apply for some of those jobs. But areas that traditionally we had not seen, if you will, a challenge in hiring, for example, solid waste drivers has always been a pretty easy job to fill, if you will, at City Hall. We're seeing some shortages there. In some areas, for example, in our security department, security officers, et cetera, we have well over 125 or so positions, and we've got probably about 15 to 30 positions open in that division. So different areas, and it goes back to Jessica's question, is that in some of those areas, they're critical, so and not having people in those positions requires us to have some overtime opportunities, obviously, for those that are there, but also could impact to some degree how quickly we are able to get some services up and running. And so all of that, we're working through that, but yes, getting a job with City Hall and city government is really a great opportunity, and we have openings in almost every department, some more than others, obviously.
And I just want to add a few of these in case anyone is listening and they're interested. But, we also need at least a dozen social workers for our new ACS department. We need parks security. These are initiatives that my administration and council have worked on together to fund these positions, and we're struggling to find folks for them. We also need engineers and architects, and we adjusted the pay there. This was several months ago, but they kind of were a specific area where folks were underpaid relatively to the market. The city has shored that up, so I'm sure if you want detailed numbers on those, HR can tell you, but I think they had like 10-15% raises in those areas because they were the market rate was so off. And lastly, even in legal, we're even short lawyers right now. That's how challenging the shortage is.
Anything else? You have a question too? Kind of a half question. I know what's that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's the city of San Francisco, other cities, other municipalities are requiring their workers to get vaccinated and return back to the voting. Is that a consideration the city of Albuquerque's had at all?
At this point, it's not. We're really using the honor system and the encouragement system. So we really want everyone to be vaccinated. It's in everyone's best interest, especially in some of our essential city positions. But you got to do what's right for our community, and we're really not at this point feeling like mandating anything of that nature that has to do with personal health is appropriate for Albuquerque, New Mexico. That was a good one for a half question. Just saying. All right. Thanks, everybody.